the original biblical languages. In the country of Chad, the developing work of Baptist Mid Missions included a hospital staffed by BMM missionary doctors and nurses, and many Chadians came to Christ as a result of that medical ministry. Though French is the language of education in the area of Chad where BI works, many people groups live side by side, each with a different heart language. Bibles International is working with 7 of those Chadian language groups and has completed the New Testament for 6 of them. The 7th is scheduled for printing soon, and the others are at various stages of Old Testament translation. It is a joy to see Chadians carrying their own New Testaments to church and being able to follow along as the preacher reads. Chad now has its own arm of Bibles International, an organization called Société Biblique Horeb. Many of God's people in the States contributed to the building of a translation center in Chad, and the facility has been put to very good use. Mamra Odalbai does an excellent job of directing the office there, and Annabeth Wivel and Joshua Hedges are the main translation consultants for the Chadian projects. Another important part of BI's ministry is literacy, and it has played a major role in both Central African Republic and Chad. BI literacy consultants develop primers for new readers. Then, using Old Testament stories that are mentioned in the New Testament, they create Old Testament storybooks for the intermediate reader. The New Testament itself is the teaching tool for the advanced reader. BI literacy consultants travel to the countries where BI works and show advanced readers how to teach others to read. We praise God for all that He has done and all that He continues to do in the heart of Africa. He has made that part of the world special to Baptist Mid Missions and to Bibles International, and we long to see the day when existing translation projects can be completed and new ones begun. We pray that God will lay the heart of Africa on your heart as well.
So that's kind of how it all got started. Let me see. We'll have to click here. Not sure what else I need to click to get the PowerPoint up there. Oh, there we go. Sorry, it's going black and yellow. Okay, there we go. Some quick facts about Chad itself. Chad is a very large, Chad is in Central Africa, of course. It's a very large country, the 5th largest in Africa, and the largest landlocked country, and it is nearly twice the size of Texas. And if that still doesn't quite resonate with you to sort of get an idea of the size, this map is the country of Chad superimposed over a map of the eastern United States. And the southern border of Chad is there in the Florida Panhandle. In fact, the town where I live is almost there in the same location as Jacksonville, Florida. And the northern border of Chad is way up in Michigan. So a very big country. It doesn't look that big when you're just looking at a whole map of Africa, but Africa is a huge continent, and so even a very big country kind of looks small there on the whole continent of Africa. You can kind of divide Chad naturally into 2 halves. These are not official legal categories or anything. It's just kind of naturally happens. Northern Chad is mostly desert, the Sahara Desert. It's mostly Muslim, and it has most of the political power. Whereas southern Chad, which is where I live, is mostly savanna. Savanna is a climate zone. It's kind of between a forest and a plain. It's got too many trees to be a plain, but not enough trees to be a full-fledged forest. And it's got a regular dry season and rainy season. And so it's not desert. The southern Chad is mainly Christian or animist. We do have a lot of Muslims, especially some that have moved down from the north because southern Chad is more fertile and more heavily populated and so on. So a lot of the Muslims in the north move south as well. And so we have a lot of Muslims, but it's still, Christians are a very large percentage, animists being just the pagan African religions. But the southern Chad has relatively little political power. The population of Chad is about 16 million, and most of those, 2/3 of those are under the age of 25, very young population in Chad. That's a fairly typical figure for a lot of sub-Saharan Africa. Africa has a very young population. It's also the 5th fastest growing population in the world, which is also fairly common in Africa. A lot of African countries have very fast growing populations. The life expectancy in Chad is about 57, but 20 years ago, a little more than 20 years ago, that was almost 10 years lower than it is now. So that has actually gone up and has improved, and we trust will continue to improve, even though it's still a ways behind other parts of the world. It is one of the poorest and least developed countries in the world. Nearly half live below the poverty line. Of course, the poverty line varies from country to country, and so maybe a figure that works a bit better is the median household income is not even quite $2,400 a year. So you could be flipping burgers at McDonald's and be making more than that in a month. And that's what whole Chadian families, some of them very large families, most Chadian families have at least 5 or 6 children, and sometimes many more than that. And so they're trying to raise all those children on that kind of a salary. It's the 3rd lowest on the Human Development Index. That's, I believe, the UN that puts that out. It's just the way of ranking different countries as far as their overall development. And I'm sure there's other ways to do that. But just kind of gives an idea. It's the 3rd lowest on that, the 3rd least developed on that ranking. And the 2 that are lower are neighboring countries. So, so it's just an area of the world that is very much less developed. That's not to say they don't have cars and so on. It's just fewer people have access to those things. So many roads are still unpaved. That's one of our nasty roads in the rainy season there. Really quite difficult to drive on sometimes. 91% have no access to electricity, and that is not evenly distributed. Most of the 9% that have electricity are in the major cities. In the rural areas, it's very, very few have access to electricity. Internet is also very limited. Only 6.5% have internet access, but internet access is growing very fast in Africa. In 2005, only 2% on the whole continent of Africa had access to the internet, and in 2018 that had gone up to 24%, which is a really big jump when you think about it. Of course, Chad is still obviously a little bit behind there at 6.5%, but it is definitely growing fast. 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, it was a lot lower than that. A little background on myself for those of you who do not know me. I'm a missionary kid from Australia, so my parents served in Australia for 36 years, and people always say, you don't have an Australian accent. Sorry about that. It's been 20 years since I lived there, so what Australian accent I did have is unfortunately long gone. I accepted the Lord at the age of 5 one morning during homeschool, and about a year and a half later I was baptized. And yes, at the age of 8, I felt that God was calling me into ministry, into missions in Africa. Don't underestimate the ability of the Lord to call even children into ministry. And my parents were always very careful to not put any pressure on myself or my brother to go into ministry, but they were always did everything as well to encourage that direction when we felt that was where God was calling us, what God was calling us to do. So all through my growing up years then, I felt that God was calling me into missions in Africa. But so later when I was in Bible college, I had a missions minor, and I went on a missions trip to Zambia. And the missionary there suggested I should consider Bible translation. These missionaries in Zambia were not involved in Bible translation, but they just noticed that I had an interest in languages, an interest in Hebrew, studying Hebrew. And so they suggested I should consider that as a future ministry possibility. And so I prayed about it, and that is indeed ultimately where the Lord led. So I was in Bible college, as I mentioned. I went to Faith Baptist Bible College out in Iowa, in Ankeny, Iowa, near Des Moines, and also went on then to the seminary and got my master's degree 2002 to 2007. And then I was on deputation 2008 to 2011. And any missionary will tell you that's a challenging time, but I did reach full support, and then went to language school in 2012. Now, some missionaries in non-English speaking countries are able to get their language study right there on the field. But Chad is really not a good place to study French. You really have to go to Chad. It's really far, far better to go to Chad already speaking French. And so I went to France for a year and studied French, and then in 2013 then went to Chad for my first term, and then my second term, which as Pastor said was a little bit extended due to COVID as well as actually other things as well, and so I have just completed my second term. An update on the translation projects I've been working with, and for those of you who are kind of not familiar with the translation process, I'm a translation consultant. I'm not a translator. The Africans are the translators. But it's kind of like the difference between an actor in a movie and the movie director. So, you normally don't see the movie director in the finished movie unless you like to watch the bonus material on the DVDs, or unless he has an acting role, I guess, which sometimes happens. But generally, you don't see the director in the movie. But he nevertheless has a very important role in guiding the actors, helping the actors to do a better job of translating, so to speak, that script to what you see in the finished movie. And so I'm not translating, but I'm guiding the Africans, in helping to guide the Africans in translating, especially with the training I've had in Greek and Hebrew. So this is generally the process each translation project goes through. It's a lot more complicated than this, but I've tried to break it down to the simplest steps. So adoption, you can't just pick a language and start translating. There's a whole process that goes into adopting a translation project. We even have a whole department that one of their main tasks is to research potential new projects and then decide whether we're going to adopt them. But after a project is adopted, then the translators need to be trained. And after they are trained, then we can start translating. And this is the step that takes the longest. And then they do some things, some aspects of it they can do in their villages. I don't have to be beside them every single day, but we do have to meet regularly to go through portions of the translation together. And eventually we check through the whole translation. So they translate the whole Old Testament or New Testament, whichever one we're working on, and eventually we will go through that, the whole of the Old Testament, the whole of the New Testament, and get a complete draft of the New Testament or a complete draft of the Bible. And, but we're still not ready to print, because then there's a finalizing process. It's kind of like if you wrote a paper in high school or in college. Hopefully you didn't turn your first draft into your professor unless you procrastinated and wrote it at the last minute. But hopefully if you got a good grade on your paper, it was probably because you did some checking and proofreading before you actually turned it into your teacher. And so we're running a whole lot of the equivalent of spell checks. It's more complicated than that, because you can't just click spell check on Microsoft Word and it'll, check your Saramajigai words. But we have spell checking, we have vocabulary, we have parallel passages, a whole lot of things we're working on. And then when that is finished, then we can move on to the printing process. All the projects I'm currently working with, the languages I'm working with, have reached this finalizing stage. So we definitely appreciate your prayers. Very crucial time for the projects. The translation teams are getting tired. They've been working many years, but we still have more to do before we can actually print it. So specifically, the projects I've been working with, Saramajigai. If you find the word Majingai a little hard to remember, just Sara is good enough. You might find that a little easier. But the Saramajigai is located in Sar, which is where I live, and Kumra, which is a town west of Sar. And it's one of the most important languages of southern Chad. It is used as a trade language in the local area. So there are many Chadians in that area who speak it as a second language, as well as those who speak it as a first language. So a very important language. And this project has been going on a long time. They've had some challenges and setbacks, but are still going on. And we hope will be finished in the near future, printed in the near future. So these are some of the books we've been working on. And some people ask, what about Genesis, Exodus, and so on? Those were done earlier. These are just specifically the books we've been working on this past term on the field. And then we started quality checking. So as I mentioned, the vocabulary and spelling and so on, we're working on those things. The Sarakaba Dem is a language located in the villages between Sar and Kiabe. Kiabe is a town east of Sar. And the translator is one of our most experienced Chadian translators. He's sitting there in the kind of turquoise green shirt there. And this project has had a lot of challenges, but still moving forward, and in fact has really made some tremendous progress in the last several years since I've been working with them, and it's really been great to see. So we've worked on a number of the prophetic books as well as portions of Leviticus and Psalms. They had actually lost 50 chapters of the Bible due to a computer virus. And we've since changed our software, and so now the whole translation is saved on an internet server, and so we don't expect that will happen again. But they had lost the hard copies as well because they had been eaten by termites, and so we couldn't find any hard copies either, so they ended up having to go back and retranslate 50 chapters of the Bible. But they were troopers and retranslated them, and I rechecked them, and we moved on. And so now they have finished all that. We have a whole draft of the Old Testament. The New Testament was already printed some years ago, but we're now working on quality checking with this team as well. Sarakaba Na is located in Kiabe. It's a town east of Sar. And this is the very first Chadian team I ever worked with. So I have a fairly long history with them. The translator struggles with poor health. He's had cardiac problems for years. And he had cardiac problems before I came to Chad even. And a few years ago, he also, on top of all these cardiac issues, he broke an ankle in a motorcycle accident. And I called him up because we had a workshop coming up where we were supposed to check through a portion of the translation, and I called him up and said, do you want to postpone this workshop? I can switch you with another team and wait until you're healed a bit. And he said, no, it's okay, I'll come. And so he came hobbling into the workshop on crutches and was a real trooper. In fact, I think we had 2 or 3 workshops at least before he was able to set the crutches aside. So he's been very courageous in moving forward in spite of the physical challenges. And we have, in the last several years, we have completed the prophetic books, many of the prophetic books, and the very last workshop before I came on furlough, we completed Ezekiel. By the way, very hard book to translate. Ezekiel, very difficult, but we completed Ezekiel and started quality checking, so they were very excited to move on to that stage of the project. Now, your first term on the field, you're doing a lot of adapting, learning, getting to know the people, getting to know the culture, languages, the ministry you came out there to work with. A lot of your first term is adapting, but as the longer you're on the field, the more you're able to participate in other opportunities that the Lord provides. So these are some ministry opportunities that the Lord has provided these last few years that are not directly related to Bible translation, but still are necessary for the ministry there in Chad. One is a book ministry. This was started in 2017 to help a Chadian Christian worker, a single woman who had because of cultural issues, had very little support from the Chadian churches. So I was selling brochures, well, not brochures, but booklets on Sundays, and then the proceeds I would just send to her to help her out. And then we expanded that, added not just the little booklets, but other larger books as well. And it's become a regular thing now. I sell just about every Sunday. I come with my folding table and I set up my literature, and whoever's there and would like to buy literature is able to do that. Good Christian literature is hard to find in Chad, so this is a real need that we have seen, and very excited to see how the Lord has been using that. Also, pastors and Bible school students, they want books. When I was in seminary, periodically, one of the college seminary professors, or maybe a local pastor, would spring clean their library and give away a whole bunch of books, and they'd spread them out on the tables there at the seminary. And a lot of the seminary students, most of them they were like kids in a candy store. They just were so excited to have free books for their ministries. But Chadian Bible school students want books just as much as my colleagues in seminary did, but they have very little access to them. And it's not even just necessarily a matter of money, but even just finding the books to buy. They usually have to be ordered from either Europe or Canada. They're rarely are they available in Chad itself, at least not for any decent price. It's often cheaper to order them from overseas than to get them in Chad, even if they are available there, and usually they're not. And so what we do is the pastors or the Bible school students, they tell me which books they need for their ministries or for their studies, and then I order them, and I keep them in my house until they finish paying them off, because I can't just give out all the books for free. That would not be not be good on a number of levels. But but I don't want to have to deal with trying to chase people down for debts either. So if they want their book, they have to finish paying for it before they can get it. And that's a system that's worked pretty well, but has some challenges. One is that many struggle to pay for the books, and even a $20 book can be quite a challenge for a Bible school student who has very little income to pay. And also, as far as the bookstore, the items I'm selling on that folding table there, it's a mobile bookstore. I just bring it on my folding table, and that's fine, but just doesn't have a lot of reach, a lot of capacity. And it's only on Sunday. Now, sometimes people will come to my house and knock on my door and get literature that way, but I'm not in a very good location to be setting up a bookstore in my house. I'm just kind of off the beaten track, so that's not something we can really depend on. But we are praying that the Lord would allow us to keep expanding this ministry, but we do have some financial needs. One is, I mentioned that the people who have ordered books often struggle to pay for them, and it's usually $15 to $20 per book, sometimes more, sometimes less, but on average it's about that. And so maybe that would be an interesting project for your VBS or Sunday school or whatever you may be interested in if you're interested in looking for a project for that. Another project is hymn books. The different language groups all have their own hymn books, and that can be quite expensive. A lot of the hymn books for these different language groups were printed in the 80s or 90s and are now out of print, so they really need to reprint them. But it's pretty expensive because these are books that are used by a lot of people, and so they need to print hundreds or even up to 1,000 copies. And so, as you can see, that would add up quite quickly. And we also have plans to expand the bookstore, so it's not just on my folding table. Not that I'm going to necessarily put away the folding table and stop doing that, but we also would like to build a permanent bookstore on a church property in downtown Saar. We have preliminary permission to do this, and we have a quote as well that it would cost about $19,000, including furniture. So this is a need. I already have. I haven't looked at the figures recently, but I know I already have a couple thousand of that. So there's still a ways to go for that. So anyway, be praying